Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Certainly. Michael, first of all, it's a great honor and privilege to host
The
you.
mic's off.
Mic is on.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to put host you in Karachi, in Pakistan. I've had the pleasure of being hosted by Michael a number of times
They
in
said they still can't
Washington.
hear.
And obviously, even though I think the Oxford University Press did not know about it, I said by some chance, they paired us again together. So this is not the first time we've been in conversation, but this is the first time we've been in conversation in Pakistan. I would like to talk about Michael a little bit away from the biography that was read out, that he's the author of so many books, and he's now the director of the South Asia Institute at the Woodrow Wilson Center. And he's been many years in Center, also as deputy director of the South Asia program. I always found Michael, whenever I visited Washington, as one of the people who knew this region, and was objective about it. I did not have a predefined notion of knowing this place from far away, from what I call the Google cowboys. They Google things and then they write about it. They don't know much about the region. They have not interacted with people, and they have definitive views. And unfortunately, I did visit Michael during the time that there was this Pakistan fatigue prevalent in Washington. So, but Michael always got a good audience, smaller one, but very knowledgeable audience that we could talk to. And I will say this, that not yesterday, not today, but in the future, we have to interact with people like Michael Kugleman more and Pakistanis. Because here is a person who is willing to listen to a point of view without being prejudiced. And therefore, whatever he then puts out in his articles or his speeches or his talks will be candid and forthright. And we must accept that, because that will help us do two things. One, that our point of view is being read objectively. And number two, that what is the United States point of view? Because obviously he is going to reflect that in his articles. And therefore we must really, really look to him. And I am really, really happy, Michael, and happy for Pakistan's sake that you're here today and speak to us. So over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Ikram. I hope everyone can hear me. Great. I really appreciate that very kind, perhaps too kind introduction. But indeed, I've been studying and specializing in Pakistan and South Asia more broadly for more than 15 years now. And ever since I was in my first semester in graduate school, took a great class on the history and politics of Pakistan and Afghanistan. It was a great class, great professor, and it was from that moment that I knew that I wanted to make a career out of studying South Asia, and particularly Pakistan. And so the rest has been history. And indeed, it's of course a fascinating, sometimes a very difficult region to make sense of. I don't consider myself an expert. I'm always learning every day. But through this work, I hope to learn as much as I can, and indeed try to provide as balanced a perspective as possible. But in the end, I feel that I'm still a student of the region, not an expert.
Well, the topic that we are supposed to discuss today is untangling South Asia. And just before we came up, a good friend of mine came up and told both of us, don't try to untangle South Asia. Right. Now, I wonder why, Michael.
Well, maybe for the reason that I just said, that it's very hard to understand, especially for an outsider, someone like me who is not from Pakistan, not from any country in South Asia. Even someone who's been trying to understand it for so long, it's so complex for reasons that I don't need to explain to this audience. So much change, so much going on at any one time, and Pakistan, of course, is just one example of how this region is so complex. If you look at the history, if you look at the different languages, there's so much to learn and try to make sense of. And so I'm sure there are plenty of answers to that question, but the very simple one is that it's just a very complex, ever-changing region. I would think that even many that live here are struggling to understand what's going on at this very moment here.
Well, one of the reasons I think we are difficult. South Asia is difficult to understand. Is that so many other civilizations have encroached upon South Asia. It's not that South Asia has been free or bounded by this thing. So, if you have people from Central Asia, people from from East Asia coming in, and then you have a blend of many from the Middle East coming in. So you really, in almost every city except the South India, you have a blend of civilizations, and that blend of civilizations is further accentuated by the fact that they are even in regions you have that thing. And then what has happened is that the urban cities have come up, and in the urban cities, what you call ghettos in United States, actually you've had entire areas where you said, okay, Liari is mostly Sindhi or Baloch, or Malir is like that, and it's the central of Karachi is mostly Mahajir, and then you have mixed population in the south. So the same thing has happened in varying ways in many cities. So when you take that all and you put it together, then you have the British civilization came in through the East India Company, and Shashi Tharoor has written a very good book on that. And and if you read that book, you come to know lots of facts and figures of what this South Asia was. And South Asia, if you want to untangle South Asia, you cannot do it militarily, you cannot do it politically, but you can do it economically. Because they're complementary things. If Punjab and Bengal, and you believe me, Bengal was the granary of South Asia pre-1977, 57. And Punjab, of course, has always been the granary. So Punjab and Bengal used to feed the entire of South Asia. This is that is subcontinent that can feed itself, that can clothe itself, right? But unfortunately, because of religious diversity, ethnic diversity, political diversity, political individual ambition, we have now in a situation where actually Pakistan today physically is there attached to South Asia, but we are not now part of South Asia, because actually, even though Bangladesh has a friendship with us, Sri Lanka, Nepal, etc., but because of the dominance of the present government in India, they are denying us space in South Asia, and we are now turning more toward the Middle East or Central Asia, to the extent that even the World Economic Forum, realizing this, has made us part of Eurasia, the group. They said Middle East and North Africa said, hey, we don't have that much oil. What are we going to do in Middle East, North Africa? So they said, okay, fine, you will be not part of this thing, we'll make you part of Eurasia. So I think first of all, we must understand the diversity. And then understanding the diversity, go towards that one place where there can be no controversy, and that is the economy. I think everybody wants people to feed itself. Everybody wants people to clothe itself. So I think that is something that if we work on assiduously, I think we can start untangling South Asia.
Right, and just a few points on that. Going back to this notion of complexity, even the term South Asia is a complex term. And as you know, many in India don't like the term South Asia. I think we could understand why. And the region is oftentimes very difficult for many to conceive of South Asia as a geographic whole. If you look at how the U.S. government looks at South Asia from a bureaucratic level, it's very interesting. It's broken down. So, the Army commands, you have CENTCOM and you have INDOPACOM. CENTCOM is essentially, it looks over a part of South Asia that includes Pakistan and areas to the west, but then Indo-PACOM oversees, not overseas, it looks over India and areas east to that. So it's almost like bureaucratically the region is bisected by the different army commands in the U.S., which is a bit problematic. We also hear terms like Southwest Asia, which is a way to describe the region as well. And I think you made an interesting point about India. One of the notable trends about South Asia, in my view, in recent years is what I would describe as a sub-regionalization effect. This is not a region that is integrated very well in terms, infrastructure, connectivity. It's not very strong. It's regarded as one of the least integrated regions in the world. And what we've seen in recent years is India trying to energize what I would describe as other regional organizations, including BIMSTEC, which of course includes all of the countries of South Asia, except for Pakistan and Afghanistan, along with a few countries in Southeast Asia. India is trying to work within that group to promote more connectivity, electricity sharing arrangements, things like that. But obviously that excludes Pakistan and Afghanistan because they're not members of BIMSTEC. And meanwhile, Pakistan has looked to work with Afghanistan. This has somewhat been impacted by the Taliban takeover. Pakistan has looked to work with Afghanistan and some of the countries of Central Asia to promote connectivity projects. And one of the concrete initiatives on that front is this new aspirational transnational railroad project that Pakistan and Afghanistan intend to work with Uzbekistan. But I feel that this elusivity when it comes to broader integration, connectivity within the entire South Asia region, the SARC region. And of course, we know SARC, being the only main South Asia regional organization, is very inefficient because of the India-Pakistan problem. An organization that has decisions made on the basis of unanimity, and yet when India and Pakistan so often disagree, it's hard to reach unanimity on decisions, and hence SARC is really very inefficient, if not close to being irrelevant.
I think, Michael, one of the problems has been that people having with the focus on the BRI and the Chinese intention to have a land-based communication route to Europe and Asia. I think people have lost track of a particular connectivity that existed. The post-Baghdad Pact, CENTO Pact, the RCD highway that we used to call the Regional Cooperation and Development. And today, frankly speaking, those two routes have become and the third one is the China-Pakistan Economic Highway, right? That you cannot do away with it. But the third is that these two, if it just needs upgradation. If you upgrade the routes from here and you connect Karachi to Gwadar to Shah Bahar, and you you upgrade the Chaman route, and then you upgrade the Kandahar route, you actually have two links to Eurasia. And actually, India is losing out on it. Because if India would connect to us, and we have a railway connection to Khokhrapar, if India would connect and through Lahore, and if we would connect with us, the entire South Asia, Southeast Asia, and for South Asia's countries to get their goods into Central Asia or even to Europe would be wonderful. But having said that, we are not the losers in that sense. We lose complementary economies. I think our textiles still go to Bangladesh, our cotton still goes to Bangladesh. Bangladesh tea has paid off a lot of this thing. Jute does still come in. But what has been denied both to India and to Pakistan is what India can give to us and what we can give to India. And because of that, a great loss. But the routes exist and it just needs upgradation. The old RCD highway, the north-south route, they exist today. And like you mentioned, the transnational railway, even the railway through Iran, which is a broad gauge railway, even that is, and this other railway, which is going through really Quetta and to Kandahar, really just needs that connection because it is narrow gauge from Quetta to the border, and it just needs that connection to Kandahar, broad gauge, and then it goes up to Mizar-e-Sharif, then to Turkandi, and from Turkandi it's you have a complete into Central Asia, in all the countries of Central Asia.
And I think that it's true. And you made a very important intervention just before that. I talked about this being a region that lacking in connectivity and integration, but indeed it didn't used to be that way if we look at the history. But I think if we talk about these ideas and aspirations of bringing the region closer together through roads and railroads, I think that gets us to another important point, another important theme as I see it in South Asia now, and that is the lack of diplomatic and political cooperation around the region. That, coupled with disputed borders or hot borders in so many places. It's so striking if you look at the broader region now. It's actually interesting that the India-Pakistan border is one of the calmest right now because there's a new border truce, or a new truce at the LOC, which was instituted about 2 years ago. Things have been relatively quiet there, but you look at Afghanistan-Pakistan, that's really hot. India-China, that border is hotter than it's been in many years. These are borders that are disputed as well. The Iran-Pakistan border, of course, is prone to periodic periods of cross-border militancy. Even the Bangladesh-Myanmar border is tense now because of these insurgencies in Myanmar that are spilling over into Bangladesh. And obviously these fraught, disputed, hot borders in so many parts of the region militate against this idea of trying to bring the region closer together. That, coupled with what I would describe as a rather ugly cocktail of, in many countries in the region, economic stress, governments that are unpopular, under a lot of pressure, and in some cases, particularly India stands out, toxic nationalism, which just does not provide the type of environment that encourages a government to reach out to a bordering country or another neighbor with which it's not getting along with and saying, let's talk about how we can move forward. It's just not the time for that. So I think that for all this talk about bringing the region closer together, linking South Asia more, linking South Asia to Central Asia, I think it's a vision more so than a reality for the foreseeable future, just because of all these political, diplomatic, geopolitical challenges.
Michael, you've talked about nationalism. I don't think nationalism by itself is something that will not bad, but
Right.
religious nationalism is bad. And what today is coming out of India is religious nationalism, right? And that is dangerous. And what it does is, obviously, you have a country of 200 million Muslims in Bangladesh, right? We're not going to accept it at the end of the day. You have Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka at the most economically fraught, but let's face it, they don't have the best of relations with India. So if you look at that, and Nepal also, and Nepal has its own problem because India wants to dominate that thing. It's a landlocked country, and therefore China, this thing is said, has a lot of ingress into Nepal. So I think if you look at it from that point of view, if you look at that, religious nationalism it makes us apprehensive. If it was nationalism by itself, yes, every country has a right to say, okay, fine, nationalism, I want this thing, etc. I want to hold my people together. They have people, the Bengalis have a different outlook on life as to the Punjabis out of the south, of the Tamils in the south. But if you have religious nationalism, which encroaches upon the religious beliefs of others and the way of life of others, it makes a great difference. And I think that is the apprehension we have, and that is why you brought the point out very nicely. Pakistan is being excluded out of everything. You just had a session before that, talked about cricket. Yeah, they tried to isolate us in cricket, right? A sport. Now, what about politically? Out of and even if you look at, there's another thing, the ocean, the Indian Ocean periphery station. Right. They're excluding us out of that also, right? We have a long coastline with the Indian Ocean. Now, obviously, this puts us in a very tenuous position because of our own situation. Our own situation being, we have a lot of affinity with the Gulf countries and Saudi Arabia, and obviously Saudi Arabia and Iran at the moment. That thing they have not at the moment. They have this thing, etc. We have a long border with Iran. We cannot afford to be on conditions. And you're right, there are sporadic incidents, but those incidents are not state to state.
Right.
They're not states, they're they're local, and they are because of the in some cases Shia Sunni strife, which is the because east of Iran is mostly Sunni, and Khuzestan province. So what you have really is a situation where I think you have to tone down that, and I think I see one ray of hope in that, and that is in New Delhi itself, the capital itself, where the Awam Admi Party has today, cut across all religions, everything, and won a victory in the capital city of Delhi, despite the dominance of BJP in other states. So I think that could balance out, and if that balances out, I think we'll have a more open South Asia.
That's an interesting point. Well, my understanding of the Admi Party in India is its power does not extend anywhere beyond New Delhi. And of course,
Yeah, I think
No, Michael, they were almost won in the Punjab.
that's true.
That's
True.
yeah,
That was
on the
close.
Punjab.
That's true.
Yes. Right.
but no, I think the BJP is going to be around for a very long time. I think it's quite clear, unless something unbelievably unpredictable happens, some type of black swan event, Modi will be back for another term, and I imagine after that, one of his acolytes will become the next prime minister. So I think that for Pakistan, I imagine the realization is already here that it's going to be grappling with an India for many years to come that will be led by this party that practices this, the type of nationalism that you describe. And I agree with you. There's nothing inherently wrong with nationalism, and that's why I was careful to qualify said toxic nationalism. There's a difference between nationalism and toxic nationalism. But indeed, I think Pakistan certainly faces some major challenges. If you look at the realities of India, what it's looking at there, and the realities of Afghanistan. And I imagine that some were surprised about how things turned out, given how bad the relationship has become with Taliban-led Afghanistan. I don't necessarily think that's going to improve anytime soon. And given that Afghanistan, as I had mentioned before, had been perceived by many in Pakistan as an opportunity to help it better link up with Central Asia, there has been a lot of focus about how Pakistan can expand its connectivity and linkages with Central Asia, obviously a really key region for so many reasons, natural resources, energy, and so on and so forth. But I think that could be hampered a bit by these new tensions with the Taliban, even though, of course, the Taliban is not opposed in principle to working with Pakistan and the Central Asian states on these infrastructure projects. I think the Taliban would welcome that. But it's more the tensions between the two, which of course could intensify in the coming weeks depending on how things go with this TTP problem, this Afghanistan-based TTP problem.
I think, and taking on from there a little bit, is that, we have to, in Pakistan, we should not link our relationship with the United States with India. India is a large country. It has got its own interests. It's a very large country, both economically, politically, and geographically, right? So, in United States is bound to have a very strong relationship with India, particularly given its China situation. But we should look at our own relationship with the United States. And I'm reminded of something in this movie called Top Gun. Where they say Maverick is re-engaging, right? So I think one good lining of what has come out of Afghanistan, of course, in an adverse way, is the situation in Afghanistan is playing in our favor. Is that United States is re-engaging with us across the board, and engaging with us because they realize that the Pakistan armed forces are the only true deterrent to the spread of terrorism, not only in South Asia, but all over the world. This is a fact of life. You cannot escape it. As much as we are now at the moment, they are not the favorites for various political reasons. But the point is that that particular deterrent exists. And that particular deterrent did the most successful counterinsurgency and counterterrorism warfare in history, and managed to tamp down. But obviously they didn't go to the root causes of it. They didn't take them out at the roots. And what we have now is something like the fireworks that they welcomed you with in Karachi recently, very close to your hotel. So, but in that sense, I think if we were to take in India and get across to India that it is in our best interest and not to take aside this fixation of an enemy of an enemy is a friend, the Chanakya rule, and say no, we have to talk to each other in the best interest of our people. Some of my best friends are in India, and they come out of the World Economic Forum, right? And my son's wedding in 2008, you know, 10, 12 of the top Indian industrialists and business flew into Islamabad. I cannot forget it. I remain engaged with them on telephone. I talk to them periodically, and you know, one of the things they keep on asking me is, when are you coming to India? And I said, get me a visa, and I'll come to India. But that is what the problem is. That isolation that India is trying to put us in, not India, I would say the BJP government is trying to put us in as this thing. And I think if the equation is more balanced in India, I agree with you, the BJP is not going anywhere very soon. But the point is, if they're more balanced, if there's more, a little bit opposition, more stronger in the regions, and they can balance the central, the cabinet in the center, I think we will have, we'll start untangling the knot in South Asia.
Right.
Now, a few points on that. Indeed, I would like to see the day where there could be better relations between the two, between India and Pakistan. But looking back over the last 2 years, I think some very unsettling developments. One, after or during the COVID pandemic, SARC convened to try to have a discussion about how to cooperate on joint responses to COVID. And I think many of us were thinking, if there was ever one time where the full region should come together to cooperate, it should be with this terrible, terrible pandemic, which affects every country, obviously. And yet, nothing really came out of those deliberations within SARC, especially in terms of India and Pakistan cooperating. And also more recently, after Pakistan's terrible floods last summer, there had been some talk, some consideration about trying to look at the possibilities for opening up more border trade between India and Pakistan so that Pakistan could import some foodstuffs, tomatoes, and maybe a few other things. But it didn't go anywhere. And I think that's a reflection. So again, this catastrophic event that Pakistan experienced, and even then, that didn't bring the two countries together. So it's unfortunate. But I, not necessarily you, but I've been rather negative in my initial comments. I think it would be useful for me to throw out a silver lining, as you've tried to throw out a few silver linings. For me, one of the notable silver linings about South Asia now is that this is a region that has a legacy in recent years, in recent decades of conflict and war. You have countries like Nepal and Sri Lanka that experienced terrible, long civil wars that ended not too long ago. Afghanistan, of course, had essentially been at war for 40 years. That war, of course, just ended in 2021. India and Pakistan, knock on wood, are in a place now where I don't expect any type don't expect the conflict anytime soon. Afghanistan and Pakistan, yes, relations are tense, but I think things are under control. So what I'm saying is that after many years where at least one country was experiencing some type of war. And if you look at India and Pakistan as well, there have been varying forms of insurgencies that have played out. Those are not as much as had been in the past. TTP is still very much a concern, but that's an exception. So I think that on the whole, there's more peace in South Asia than there had been for many times in the past, including in the distant past. So that's something to build on. But I think that here, if someone were to ask me, could there be another war in the region anytime soon? I would think probably not, but if there is one likely conflict that we could see in the coming months or the coming years, I would actually, quite frankly, say India and China, given how things have been playing out there along that border. I worry about that. But the bottom line, the point of positivity I want to make is that the region is experiencing more peace and stability than had been the case for many years in the years prior to now.
Well, I'm going to give two comments on that.
Pushback.
One is the pushback. One I'll say about I'll put in another silver lining, and one silver lining is the Indus Basin Treaty. You notice through 3 wars, it has not been touched, because And the next war, if it comes about, the bigger war will be on water. The water is the lifeline of any nation. People will go to war because of water, right? Now, as far as China and India is concerned, 50 years ago, I was flying a helicopter attached to the People's Liberation Army because the Chinese did not have helicopters and they were making the Karakoram Highway. And the Karakoram Highway was, it was beyond us because at that height, so they had sort of disarmed two PLA divisions, and those were the ones making the road. And I was attached to the Chinese. I used to fly there, wounded and injured all over the place. And I saw a little bit of this region, which is the current dispute region. Today, the position that Chinese are occupying in Ladakh, right? India, there's no way that they can ever take them out of the. They are occupying all the high ground, right? And they are, and at the moment, they have stopped for whatever reason, political reason, they have stopped. But if there was ever a conflict, that place would be overrun in days, if not weeks. If not weeks, because the Chinese have brought in they have created roads and logistics right up to where they are. And even though India is not saying it, the fact of the matter remains that the territory that Chinese are occupying is formerly used to be in Indian hands, and they have got that area. And if I'm sure you've read about the Sino-Indian 1962 war and how the Chinese used their logistics, or rather Chinese used the Indian logistics against them. The Indians would rely on conventional logistics, but Chinese would not, and they went across mountain passes on their mountain troops and all that. So I think the best is that the status quo should remain, and we should not get into another Ukrainian type of situation, because that would not be good for both for this thing and for Pakistan. Because then if something happens like that, Pakistan would be under pressure from all sides, and mostly public pressure. Like it was in 1962. In 1962, United States stepped in when Pakistan was ready to go into Kashmir, right? And the Indian troops were absolutely out of the picture, and we could have just walked into Kashmir. United States stepped in and said, we guarantee that there will be talks in Kashmir after this, and we will this thing. And India backed it up, and therefore President Ayub took a decision not to engage in hostility, right? I see our leaders are not as strong as Ayub, right? They may be tempted. They say, okay, let's do the fight, and then it'll be a wider conflict, but don't expect India to sit back and do nothing.
No, I agree. I take your point. I think that I don't want to overstate. I don't want to come across as a warmonger. I don't want to make it seem like I'm looking for, where's the next war going to be? I really hope that this region does not experience another conflict, given what's happened in the past. But I think that not just the India-China border tensions, but also the broader India-China competition is really something to watch. If you're looking for big storylines in the region, that's one that I've been monitoring. I think that we should all be paying a lot of attention to in the coming years. We all know about China's activities, its increasing investments through the Belt and Road Initiative throughout South Asia, which is, of course, very concerning to India. But not only what China is doing on the lands of South Asia, but also in the contiguous waters. India is very concerned about what it describes as China's growing naval presence in the IOR, the western regions of the Indian Ocean region. The fact that China's only known overseas military base is in Djibouti, which is, of course, in India's immediate neighborhood, so to speak. This is all very concerning to New Delhi. And India's claim that Chinese spy vessels have been seen near the Andaman Sea. This is all very concerning for India. So I think that given that broader thing, given those broader perceptions in India about what China is up to in the region, coupled with this festering border dispute, even though the Chinese and the Indians talk frequently on very high levels, there's military dialogue essentially every month about the border dispute. Trade between the two countries is very rigorous. Even though it seemed like after the Ladakh crisis that the Indian government was threatening to curtail its commercial relationship with China, other than banning hundreds of Chinese apps, trade has continued. Despite all that, I think that this is really something to watch in the coming years, and just because of the broader competition and just how much enmity seeped into the relationship after that bloody clash in Ladakh. I mean, the bloodiest clash between the two countries since the war that you referred to. So it's definitely something to watch moving forward.
I think like to go back to where we were and said the solution is economic. The solution is economic because we have complementary economies and economies throughout South Asia. We consume a lot of tea, we consume a lot of jute. In Bangladesh or India, all right, even though it's got cotton and all, it does need, our type of cotton, grey cloth, for example, to make it better qualified, this thing, etc. I think if we opened up the pharmaceutical side, the prices of medicine would drop in Pakistan considerably, right? And similarly, like you said earlier, and I talked about earlier, there has been an occasion where Pakistan has balanced its vegetable prices by importing it across the border from India, and to something so that the prices have kept down like that. So I think that way, if we were to at least, like you said, like China, India trade is at an all-time high, except, right, and the only thing I think, if I'm not mistaken, India has banned TikTok somewhere, right? I wish we would ban TikTok also. But the point is that, because that's an addiction, right? And I think India took a decision, of course, political decision, but I think in the long run, they also thought about, curbing its mobile telephone companies, keeping it within certain this thing. So I think if you look at it, I see a role also in untangling South Asia in the United States. United States is a superpower. United States has an interest in this region, leaving it aside interest of containing China. United States has an interest to ensure that one of the largest nuclear powers in this region is Pakistan, right? We have the nuclear assets, we have the means to deliver them. Nobody is scared of them except, we balance it out with India because it's India specific, right? So China is not worried about it, or Iran is not worried about it, Middle East is not worried about it. But the fact of the matter remains, I'm sure a destabilized Pakistan would not be in the interest of the United States, right? So I think that way, United States must play a greater role in untangling the South Asia, right? And it has, I think it has influence with India. Maybe not inordinate influence, as we see that they could not stop the Indians, from taking Russian oil. That thing. But the point is that it does have a role to play because so much of investments of United States are into India now, and they would be affected.
Yeah, so just a few points on that. One on your comment on a U.S. role in untangling South Asia. I'd argue that actual U.S. policy is probably going to tangle up South Asia further. And I say that because we're seeing a bit of a shift in U.S. policy in South Asia since the U.S. pullout from Afghanistan, where the U.S.-China competition is now really impacting U.S. thinking about the region. And so we're starting to see significant levels of high-level engagement from the U.S. government with many countries in South Asia, including those that had essentially given short shrift for many years. I mean, this is why you're seeing these phone calls between Secretary of State Blinken and his counterparts in Nepal and Maldives. These things didn't used to happen. It's why one of the last big moves that the Trump administration made on Asia was declaring that it wanted to establish an embassy in the Maldivian capital. all of this is happening because of U.S.-China competition. That's really the main reason, in my view. That may not be the official position, but I think that's the idea. The U.S. is keen to not displace China in South Asia. That's not realistic, and that's not the desire of the U.S. government, but more so to counter what China is doing by trying to maybe take steps that could ensure that China would not be, or that these countries in South Asia would not be quite as reliant on China commercially as they've become. So, so this I think is going to tangle things up more, and obviously this doesn't necessarily benefit Pakistan, I would think. But to your point, indeed, I think that the U.S. interests are definitely served by a more prosperous, certainly stable, interconnected South Asia. And certainly, the U.S. government supports these connectivity projects. And you go back to the really legacy projects like TAPI, which we've been hearing about for decades, but it doesn't really move that much. Well, it's moved a bit. But so this idea of cross-border connectivity in South Asia, there's a lot of support for that, and long has been on bipartisan levels within the U.S. government. But I think that whereas for many years U.S. policy in South Asia was shaped through these separate lenses, the war in Afghanistan, growing out the relationship with India, making things work with Pakistan, now it's a good thing that the U.S. is looking at South Asia with a broader geographic lens. It's looking at it as a broader whole, but through a China lens, which at the end of the day may not be helpful, but that's geopolitics now. To your point about economics being the solution, yeah, I completely agree with that. But I think it's important to accentuate just how challenging that is going to be. As I think you all know, South Asian countries trade more with countries outside the region than they do with countries in the region. So, for instance, Pakistan. Does anyone know what country is Pakistan's top export destination right now? U.S. Absolutely. So, I mean, that's great for the U.S.-Pakistan relationship, but why send most of your exports to a country hundreds of miles away? Obviously in an ideal world, it would be India or it would be other countries that border Pakistan. We all know why this can't happen, but I think it's going to take, obviously, not revolutions, that's not the right words, major changes in political relations, diplomatic relations. I would argue the issue of leadership, which we haven't hit on, different forms of political leadership, willing to take big risks for the service of economic growth and so on. And obviously, there's just going to have to be better infrastructure on the ground, for sure. I mean, you can't start trading more unless there's the infrastructure to support it, better roads and so on. So I'm fully with you on this, but I think that we need to acknowledge that it may seem simple. Oh, if countries just started trading more with each other, bordering countries with each other, that would help matters, but it's going to take a long time to get to that place. And I'm a big proponent of U.S.-Pakistan relations, but I would be perfectly happy if the U.S. is no longer Pakistan's chief export destination. I think we can understand why.
I think I agree with you there, but the other thing I want to bring to your notice is that if, the China-Pakistan economic corridor, I think there are two things to it. First of all, it's necessary for Pakistan in a way, far more necessary for China. They needed an outlet, which they were denied in Southeast Asia. Now with Ukrainian war, the central thing is completely gone. So this leaves them almost with this only existence. But if you travel on that road, and I have, of course, known extensively many years ago, and I know that area, it's very difficult to see large volumes of trade coming down that road or going up that road. I think if the United States really engages with Pakistan and Gwadar, I think that is something that must happen. Because if United States engaging in Gwadar would take our over-reliance on one superpower. We are relying out of sheer necessity. There's nobody else the thing, and we do need Gwadar. So if United States engages, and this, I call this Pakistan's gold coastline. The beaches from Somyani down right up to Gwadar, sun-swept, 330 days of the year. you cannot imagine what beautiful lagoons there are, right? And beautiful places, that thing, etc. I mean, it's really something that the thing, and of course, vast open areas where industries can come up, cultivation can come up. So I think we do need United States engagement in this area rather than, the thing. And I think, the China-Pakistan economic corridor, only for political reasons, India is threatened, because they say that it is passing through a disputed territory, etc. Well, they didn't call it that 50 years ago. It only started when it became, more serious. So I think my own feeling is that one of the things that we in Pakistan need to do is to engage United States into CPEC and see that CPEC is a place from where we can have stability, because the north-south axis of the Rashidi axis also comes down to CPEC.
So yeah, and I think it's a great point. I think for some, the reflexive response to your point would be, well, no, it's not going to happen. The U.S. doesn't accept CPEC. But as you know, I'm sure, as I'm sure many of you know, the U.S. government previously supported CPEC on the record. It's easy to forget given how things have changed. But back during the early years of CPEC, and even into the early Trump years, you had on-the-record statements from U.S. officials at the State Department who were saying that we think, I'm paraphrasing, we think this is a great thing for Pakistan, it'll help promote stability and prosperity. It was only when U.S.-China competition heated up that things changed. And many of you will remember the senior South Asia official at the State Department at the time, Alice Wells, gave a speech at the Wilson Center where I work. We hosted her, and this was in 2019. It was the first time that a U.S. official had publicly commented negatively and critically about CPEC. It happened then. Again, it happened because of how bad the tensions were getting with China. It wasn't anything against Pakistan. And I think that inherently, the U.S. supports the broader goals and aspirations and the vision behind CPEC, but for strategic reasons, it can't support it right now. But I think that what may be more realistic than the U.S. trying to get involved with Gwadar, I don't think it would do that because it's clearly branded as a flagship CPEC project, even though it's really struggled. And I should say CPEC has lost a lot of momentum in recent months. I think what's more realistic is for the U.S. to focus on other ways of providing infrastructure assistance, infrastructure investments in Pakistan. And I think I made this comment in a session yesterday. There's a relatively new U.S. government agency called the IDFC, the Development Finance Corporation. It's linked with the Indo-Pacific policy. And the idea behind this is to sponsor infrastructure investments across the Indo-Pacific. Now, formally in official documents, the U.S. government does not consider Pakistan part of the Indo-Pacific policy. It considers every other South Asian country other than Pakistan and Afghanistan as a part of it. But when it comes to infrastructure, there is clearly interest on the part of the U.S. to look into possibilities of bringing DFC investments, infrastructure investments, to Pakistan. Many of you will remember last summer a senior U.S. official, a State Department official, spent about a week in Pakistan exploring this very issue. This is the Dilawar Syed, a Pakistani American. He's the top official on investment at the State Department. These conversations were happening on high levels. So clearly there's that goal. I don't think the U.S. would be willing to start investing in CPEC projects, but it certainly would want to invest in other forms of infrastructure projects, again, to counter what China is doing. And I would want to try to shatter the myth, this idea that the U.S. is trying to contain China. It's not. Counter is a very different term from contain. It's trying to provide alternatives, do what China is doing, but in different ways, and according to the U.S. government, do it in better ways by providing investments that are more equitable, transparent. This is the U.S. government position. So, yeah, I think that there is potential for that. And especially with, we've seen some improvements in U.S.-Pakistan relations in recent months. So I think there definitely is an opening, at least for now.
Thank you. I think, Michael, we need to invite some questions now. And, okay.
One opportunity of resolving the Kashmir issue peacefully in the recent past came when President Trump offered to mediate between India and Pakistan. Now, this was something hugely welcomed by Pakistan, but sadly rebuffed by India. Now, to your mind, what was the reason behind India rejecting the offer? What was India afraid of? Thank you.
I think, we can't look into Mr. Modi's mind, but I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, I can take that.
Actually, he did not offer to mediate. This is a misconception. Well, he did offer to mediate in a way. This is what he said. He said he would be happy to mediate if both India and Pakistan are open to that idea. But he must have known, or people close to him must have known, that India would never want him to mediate. So in that sense, I think it was not a true offer of mediation. It was really essentially a way to appease both sides. He was able to, clearly, as you noted, it was well received in Pakistan. It indicated a desire to try to mediate. But I think he was also essentially appeasing India in a sense, too. He said, if India wants that to happen, India was never going to ask for mediation. The reason why India wasn't willing, as you know, India has always been it's been opposed for many years to any type of external involvement in the Kashmir issue, and it's just a matter of policy. But it is notable, you're right, that was a different U.S. policy. That U.S. presidents typically don't even go that far to say that I'd be happy to mediate if both sides ask. But more broadly on the Kashmir issue, my sense is that the political realities are such in India that there's no scope for discussion or dialogue on this issue at all, quite frankly. And India is not going to reverse its decision to revoke Article 370. I know that's what Pakistan's government has been insisting happen. So I think it raises some difficult and maybe some uncomfortable questions. And I don't want to be too provocative at this moment, but it raises the question of, can Pakistan accept that nothing is going to change on the Kashmir issue and move beyond that? And I think that's going to be a question that'll come. And I know, as you noted, it's such an important issue. I'm aware that so many leaders here have referred to Pakistan and referred to Kashmir as Pakistan's jugular vein. I'm aware of that, but still I think that it's very unrealistic to think that there could be any movement on resolving that dispute. And again, it raises the question of, would Pakistan be prepared to just accept things as they are and try to move forward and build better relations with India beyond that? I think it's a question that will continue to be relevant in the years ahead.
Hi, Michael. This is a question for you. So we know the Quad is a reality, right? People in the U.S., all over the world agree it is designed, Quad, for people who do not know, is United States, India, Australia, and Japan. And many people agree that it's designed to contain China. Let me just finish on that. So now, Gwadar is a reality. My question to you is, and China has sunk in like over $60 billion. Most of it is spent. And it's a deep sea port. Can Gwadar or Pakistan break the containment of China? In my view, it can, down the road, if things get bad. So in that case, it puts Pakistan in peril with the United States. And the United States can exert a lot of pressure on Pakistan. The IMF is being extremely difficult on Pakistan. We cannot separate that IMF. We all know who controls IMF. So what would be your view? The simple question is, can Gwadar break the containment of China? In the Pacific, it is contained. It's got 11 carrier groups out there. That's the question.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess I would respectfully disagree with the way the question was posed. My own view is that U.S. policy is not to contain China. The idea of containing suggests wanting to pin it down. But what we've seen with U.S. policy is to try to take steps to do things differently and, according to the U.S., better than China does in order to draw countries away, to reduce countries' reliance on China commercially. So you mentioned the Quad. You're right. It is China focused, but the idea behind the Quad is to push back against China, to counter it by generating essentially public goods, COVID vaccines, clean energy technology, things like that, and deliver them across the Indo-Pacific and do it better than China can. Now, obviously, none of the countries in the Quad, individually or together within the Quad, can hold a candle to what China has been able to do, especially on infrastructure investment. But that's the idea behind the Quad. To your point about Gwadar, maybe potentially, yeah, if that port were actually to be developed and completed, then yes, it would be a game changer. And I think that would get to your point. But my sense is that we're a long ways away from that. There's been a lot of momentum losses there, and there have been a lot of protests, local community protests against what's going on in Gwadar. And with the CPEC momentum losses in general, because of the economic slowdown here and in China and Chinese government security concerns here, this all suggests that intended flagship project is not going to get to the point where we could talk about it being a game changer that could challenge these Quad policies.
I'll take one last question because we're running out of time. Please.
Imdad Chandio, I am from Department of International Relations of Shah Abdul Latif University. My question is that why diplomacy is not given an opportunity to break this stalemate between India and Pakistan relations, because it is felt that there is a boycott of diplomacy for this. So what are the major reasons, do you think, that are, resisting this opening of the diplomatic channels between Pakistan and India?
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if you mean diplomacy between India and Pakistan or outside diplomacy, the former, India-Pakistan diplomacy. Well, I think you and others would know better than I, but I think it's just a reality of the politics of the time, that the Indian government is not particularly keen to engage with Pakistan. And I think the Indian position would be, or not the Indian position, the Indian government position would be, well, we tried, right? When Modi was first, when he was, soon after he took office as Prime Minister, he made that trip to Lahore to meet with Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. And then look what happened after, the terrorist attacks that happened. So, essentially the idea there is that, Modi tried the Nixon goes to China effect. And it didn't work. So why try again? One could also take an opposite position and think, well, that was almost a decade ago. That was, 2015 or so? That was a long time ago. Why not try again? But it's election season in India, a lot of key state elections this year, and of course, national elections next year. Modi's going to win no matter what, but still, I think that for the BJP to decide at this moment in time, with key elections coming, it's not the time to suddenly extend a hand to Pakistan, which I think is unfortunate, but I think that's the reality. And then, on the Pakistan side, I don't want to speak for Pakistani official views, but my sense is that, is it really the Modi government that you want to reach out to at this point, given all its policies and everything that's happened in recent months and over the last few years? So I think that gets to the issue.
People, I think, why don't you give a closing statement?
Well, I'll keep it very brief. I just want to say that this was wonderful. I should have said this at the top. It's really great to be back in Pakistan and back in Karachi. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you, and I appreciate all the questions. It's always a wonderful opportunity to engage, and just want to say thank you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, everybody. And we look forward, Michael, to your presence in Washington to give Pakistan's position objectively, as you have been doing all these years. And we're really proud of you because of that. Thank you.
Thank you.